Morning. It's Thursday, February 25th, 2021. We're taking up S25 and Act relating to miscellaneous cannabis regulation procedures. We've gone over the bill with legislative counsel. Much of the bill is technical amendments to the bill that we passed last year, S54. I can't remember what the act number was. We're now taking testimony on proposed amendments from various individuals. The first witness this morning is Graham, and I can't pronounce his last name. I do my best, I try, but I'm just going to refer to him as Graham, and he can introduce himself. Thank you for being here, Graham.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Graham Unangst-Rufenacht. I'm the policy director at Rural Vermont, and I'm also a farmer in the Calais, Plainfield, Marshfield area. So again, I appreciate you all having myself and our coalition partners in today. I believe I spoke with this committee 2 years ago about what the time was S54. And we've spoken a little with Senator White and Senator Sears over the last couple months about some of our concerns as a coalition related to agricultural access and equity and economic equity and racial equity in this bill, and how we might be able to have some of our concerns addressed through the legislative process as well as the rulemaking process. In terms of S25, I don't think there's anything in there that our coalition opposes, from the town opt-in requirements to the CCB deciding about integrated licenses. We do have a number of our own amendments related to racial equity and disproportionately impacted communities, which I believe Mark will speak to later, that will be coming in a bill, which he will be able to tell you more about. And what we explained to Senator Sears a couple of days ago is that we expected all of our agricultural and economic equity provisions to also be included in a bill that that includes those racial equity provisions, and unfortunately they weren't. So we're sort of left in a position in which we have a number of concerns and bullets and findings and work that we put into this, and we don't have it in the most accessible form for you, and for that we apologize. But what I'd like to do is at least go through some of our concerns, and I'd quickly also say that we've spoken to both the Senate and House Agricultural Committees, as we'd really like to have an opportunity for our members, farmers, cultivators to speak to those committees. We've not had, to some extent, it feels like we're getting a little bit of a runaround in terms of how we are able to get in front of those committees and get our members to actually have a chance to speak to people who have the expertise to sort of understand sort of the farm and agricultural and economic access issues related to agriculture that we'd like to get into. But in lieu of that, we can at least speak to you here, and we'll continue to press the agricultural committees. I'm also speaking with House members, Representative Ansell and others, to try to find ways for our concerns to be heard. So I'll just quickly go through some of our concerns, and to be entirely transparent as well, I am required to be in another meeting at this time. So once I speak, and if you have any questions, I'll take them then, but then I will be leaving the meeting to attend another meeting.
We all understand that.
Okay, I appreciate that. So just really quickly, from the agricultural perspective, we understand there were concerns which led to, at the last minute, cannabis being considered a non-agricultural crop. And I think we'd like to speak a little bit to our concerns around that. We propose a craft licensing structure and cost of craft licenses. We also recognize and realize that you all have been discussing recently the delay in implementation and some of the concerns around how we're going to have discussions about licenses, fees, and all the things we need to this session. So I hope that some of what we've offered here, and I've forwarded some of it to Senator Sears, is helpful in those conversations you all having at arriving at some outcomes related to fee structure, licensing structure, and other things that we need to get accomplished before as implementation rolls out. I think from an agricultural perspective, as we see this, the Vermont required agricultural practices define an ag product as any raw agricultural commodity that's produced principally on a farm. includes products prepared from raw agricultural ag commodities principally produced on the farm. From hemp to crops for alcohol, biofuels, these are all considered agricultural. The Vermont State Ag Plan has multiple briefs about the critical nature of alcohol sales, the production of alcohol, the cultivation of hemp, and a lot of non-food products related to the state's agricultural future. And we also recognize that, the communities that we represent, small farmers, homesteaders, they have skill sets related to this. And, some of them are already engaged in the existing economy. And when this crop is made considered non-agricultural, it has a lot of impacts related to economic equity and access issues for the agricultural community. So when we think about agricultural easements, current use, these are valuations that affect people's ability to economically access land, access the ability to grow crops, which, if this is considered non-agricultural, will put those folks at a disadvantage. You will not be able to grow this crop on land in agricultural easement, in land in current use, except for the narrow provision currently allowed under 1,000 square feet of land if the land is not transferred, and if the land is already in current use prior to cultivation beginning. So we're just trying to help folks understand that there's going to be some impacts on farmers in particular who have worked over decades to get land into current use, agricultural easements, et cetera, which helps them to economically afford to be able to farm. And I think with this crop in particular, we recognize that there is a real challenge in farm viability right now, not just in the dairy sector, but in all sectors in Vermont. And this is a crop that we really feel has a high potential for farmers to be able to make more of a just livelihood in relationship to, just as other people in the industry will. That doesn't mean that we think it should be treated like tomatoes or squash or any sort of saleable, food product from the farm. But similar to alcohol sales based on a farm, for example, down the road from me is Hooker Mountain Distillery, and they sell their distilled spirits at their farm stand that principally produced on their farm. They still need to go through the licensing process as any other person who sells alcohol would, and follow those procedures, et cetera. And I'm happy to address and speak to some of the concerns brought up around nuisance, whether it be odor or around civil or criminal asset forfeiture, which Chair Partridge at the Agricultural Committee brought up with me. And I'd love to see just some examples of those concerns playing out nationally, especially related to civil or criminal asset forfeiture. Then we get sort of into our ultimate goal is, one of our goals is to have this declared an agricultural crop, and to, rather than having this sweeping regulation which says this will not be agricultural, let's look at what can we do to put scale appropriate regulations in place to make sure that this can be an agricultural crop like other agricultural crops that are more risky, whether it's raw milk, whether it's on-farm slaughtered poultry, whether it's tobacco, whether it's alcohol ingredients. We can put some particular regulations on them that make it more appropriate, but doesn't just eliminate the ability for a lot of farmers to be able to produce this crop on land that they have in reserved for agricultural use. We are, we also
I did break in a second, Graham, and make sure. I don't know how to get you to the Agriculture Committee. They basically don't want to deal with this. That's what I sense. I'm happy to redo what we did in current use in the Senate side in S25, if that helps to. We had a much larger, we ended up settling with a house on 1,000 square feet, which is, and also the grandfathering in and all of that. So I'm happy to look at going back to that if the committee wanted to. Somehow we went to hemp and made that an agricultural product, did we not?
Yes, and we have an apparatus set up for regulating it from seed to sale.
So, and what you're talking about is similar.
Yeah, and in particular other states, the departments of agriculture also regulate cannabis sales in particular other states as well, and it's designated as an agricultural use in particular states. And in some states, they allow that to be determined at the municipal level, which I'm not endorsing necessarily, but I just think it's good to know that this is how it's done in other states in some cases.
Can I ask, Graham, can I just ask you a question? What you're talking about here is the regulations and the comparing it to raw milk and stuff. You're talking about regulations and limits around the sales of it. But if it's an agricultural product, there is no regulation around the growing of it. An agricultural product, agriculture has no zoning. It doesn't have to abide by local zoning or anything. So there's a difference between regulations around selling, but making it an agricultural product would mean that nobody can determine where it could be growing right next door to me on the empty lot there without any zoning requirements and the other difference is that, like with hops and stuff, they are not the product itself. So the security of hops isn't very much of an issue, because you have to do a lot to make it into liquor. But the security of marijuana, it's an entirely different crop than hemp and hops. So I just point that out and ask about the lack of any regulation for the growing part of it if it's an ag product.
Yeah, you're correct. I mean, the regulation of the growing part would hopefully be tasked with the Agency of Agriculture. And I think related to that question, though, we did suggest some parameters which would affect regulations around the growing. Specifically, we suggest differentiating between indoor, outdoor, and mixed light cultivation. And the only cultivation we would recommend would be considered agricultural would be outdoor cultivation. We also recommend production caps such that the maximum amount that anyone could grow would be an acre outdoor. So we're saying that this would make this a much more accessible industry. You would sort of decommodify the crop. You would allow a lot more people to access it, and you would put regulations such that the scale couldn't get very inappropriate, and it couldn't get to the point that we see giant hemp fields right now where you have 60 acres in plastic, which I think is a concern for a lot of environmental reasons, but also, as you talk about, just concerns for neighbors, et cetera. We've seen hemp plants stolen at the community level, et cetera. In terms of the security concerns, there are some provisions written into the law about how to protect crops. And I'm just curious to have that conversation more about safety and about some of the concerns related to it. And I'd be curious to hear how that's played out in other states as well.
I don't know if other states have right to farm laws like we do. And that might be, comparing them might be a little bit tricky.
Senator Baruth.
I wanted to second what Jeanette said, and also what the witness is saying in a different place. So I take the point about current use and agricultural easements. I think that's a very valid concern, but I think Senator White is correct. And my introduction to Vermont agriculture was sitting with Bobby Starr for 2 years on the Agriculture Committee, my first session. And, one of the things Bobby drilled into me over the years was that you can't tell farmers how to grow their crops, or, there's a sovereign view of the farm. And I think that's sacred to a lot of Vermont farmers. I think we would run into endless problems trying to create a secure and regulated growing environment if this were a purely agricultural product. And the coalition that got the bill and got it all the way through to law and is now looking to reform it, part of what they had to give up along the way was the idea that growers would have complete control over the environment. So, there are controls established, and that made certain people in the House and the Senate okay with voting for it. So at this point, it's hard for me to imagine that we would go back to a situation where you would say to Vermont farmers, feel free to grow cannabis as you like on your property. And I just don't think we'd be very successful regulating or limiting the power of the farmer.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator. I never served on agriculture, so.
I have also.
I would suggest that we do what we can in S25, though, and I think we could go back to our version of the current use. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was much more expansive. And I think that's, anything that we do that forces us into big marijuana is going to go against what we're trying to accomplish here. And so I think things like current use are an advantage to the farmer. Maybe we can't do what in S25, what Graham and others are asking us, but I think we can at least plant the seeds. That was a bad. I think at least we can make some movement on a few things and then have a separate bill for next year that does some of the other things that, it's hard to believe that we're a week and a half from crossover and have to pass these bills out. And I understand, and I can certainly sympathize with the frustration. On the good news is things got slowed down so bad that I think next year would still be timely on some of this more complicated stuff.
I do really appreciate hearing the concerns expressed, and I think I think this is a great reason why it would be great to have this conversation in the Agricultural Committee, where we could speak to, we could have a conversation about how we could create regulation. And I do understand that there will be concerns, and there may just be different disagreements about levels of risk and what the benefits are. But I'll just quickly go through a couple of other things that we're suggesting here. And in terms of the commodity scale cannabis, I really think that something for you all to look at is our production caps and is some sort of supply management. I think that would really increase access across the board for smaller cultivators. It would make sure that we don't have certain types of players essentially engaging in this industry in Vermont. The profit motive and the profit exploitation motive wouldn't be there if the cap on production were there. I also urge you to look into differentiating between outdoor, mixed light, and indoor cultivation. Because, for example, when we currently have things like 1,000 square feet of production allowed for the small cultivator license, it doesn't differentiate between that. And there's essentially a scale of like 4 to 1 throughout the course of a year of what can be produced in an indoor environment versus an outdoor environment, based on what we've heard from cultivators across the country and from our partner, Vermont Growers Association. So I think there's some interesting ways we could look at regulating scale to affect some of the concerns here. So we suggest a craft license tier. This is already in the legislation. There will be craft licenses, and I don't need to get too far into it. It's essentially a tier of small farmers, small retailers, et cetera, who can only source from each other, and they're really limited in their scale. We also propose, a small farm craft license, and this gets into what Senator White was saying, and Senator Baruth, and related to that. If you have a product principally produced on the farm, you are allowed to sell that product on the farm. This would essentially be a craft license where, again, you'd have a lot of restrictions and regulations in place to ensure the safety and security of that product. But you're essentially saying this farmer can, with fewer requirements and costs than a normal retail outlet, be able to sell from their farm under provided they meet X, Y, or Z conditions. We also just talk about including the different types in different times of the licensing process, and I'll leave that to I think our coalition member Jeffrey to speak to, because he can speak to it better than me. And lastly, we've really put in some concerns around the regulatory body, the CCB. We noticed that there's really not a process for members of the CCB to be removed. There's really not much ability for the advisory committee to have an active role. So we suggested that the advisory committee have some ability to veto decisions made by the CCB, and also some ability to remove members of the CCB, or somebody have that ability. And I think, for my concerns, I might leave it there and let my partners speak to the rest of what we've brought forward.
Senator White has a question. I realize you got to go to another meeting.
Graham, just quickly, I believe that the legislature has the veto ability for anything that the Cannabis Control Board, they have to come to us with their recommendations and we approve. So there is a veto ability for the way I understand that it's structured. And
Jeanette, maybe you can check me on this, but I thought that the governor had the power to remove board members for cause.
No, only way according to the statute, the only way, there's 3 board members, and the only way one can be removed is with the other 2 removing that person.
Oh, I see. Okay. And is that only for cause? Like negligence or?
It doesn't say, it just says that the only way they can be removed. So if 2 people on the board think that somebody is being obstructive or doing horrible things, they have the right to remove that.
Wow,
person.
I would be in favor of looking into that, because I think in other boards where they're appointed by the governor, if somebody is perennially missing meetings, neglecting the job, something like that, they can be removed with a hearing, and they have the right to make a defense. But if the other two board members can just vote for any reason,
I think that's all it says in the statute, but I think that that's certainly something that Michelle
Michelle
probably knows
has
better.
yeah. Michelle can help us with this.
Sure. Excuse me. So remember, the evolution of this section was that when you created the board originally in S54, you wanted it to be an independent entity, so that you wanted to kind of isolate the board somewhat from kind of political winds, depending on who is in the administration at the moment. That changed somewhat with regard to the appointment authority and things like that once it was in the House. But the provision that still made it through, which was what you had in the original S54, was that a member may only be removed only for cause. So cause is required by the remaining members of the commission in accordance with the APA. And so it does have to be for cause, but and you can obviously change this if you reconsider, but your original thing was that you didn't want it to be that maybe a board member was taking certain actions. They were whoever is the governor at the time didn't agree with, maybe politically or something. And so you wanted to insulate that process a little bit.
Thanks.
Okay. Graham, Senator Benning, I'm mindful of Graham need to leave. So
yeah, this is not for Graham necessarily, but I wanted to jump in on this part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So if Graham has to go, that's okay. It wasn't something I was going to ask of Graham. I just wanted to remind folks that we received a letter from the governor way back when. One of his issues was the board members, and the administration was upset. I'm reading from it now. Board members are now only removable for cause by the other board members. This removes the board from accountability to the governor and constitutes an unconstitutional usurpation of the governor's constitutional duty to faithfully execute the laws. This is a provision that exposes all of the work of the board to legal challenges. So this area is probably ripe for some conversation that we might want to provide a clearer path for how they can be removed.
With all due respect to the Judiciary Committee members, I think that's a government operations issue more than judiciary. Although it is a constitutional issue, I suppose, where frequently this particular administration has thrown up constitutional barriers that I haven't seen in my other years here on a variety of things. And I won't go into the detail of it.
And I disagree with the constitutional issue. I'm looking at the Constitution right now.
Yeah. Well, I do too, but I there was a reason that I think it was at the Government Operations Committee level, wanted to make this independent, similar to the way we have an independent Defender General.
well, and if the governor still retains the power to appoint, and those are limits on the terms of those people, it's not as though the governor doesn't have a lot of power over the board.
Anyway, any other questions for Graham? Or Graham, do you have any other comments for us?
No, thank you for your time. I'm going to take my opportunity to leave and get into this other meeting and hand it over to my coalition partners. But thank you all.
Stay in touch.
I will. I
Do what we can here. Okay, Jeffrey. Welcome to Senate Judiciary this morning.
Thank you, Senator. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. I do have some prepared remarks, which I am going to read, and then they'll be brief, and I'll just go into some comments and take questions afterwards, if that's fine.
That's fine.
All right. I don't know if Graham's here anymore. Thank you, Graham. That was fantastic. I appreciate it. Hard to follow up with that. So good morning, senators. Thank you for the opportunity to address your committee today to speak to Bill S-25 and the language, the sort of loose amendments we would like to introduce to bring resolution to racial, small business, and the agricultural inequities that currently exist in Act 164, 2020, as outlined by our coalition in the language that we sent over to you guys, and also as outlined as has been mentioned earlier this morning already by the governor last year in his what we're calling the non-signing statement. It is our belief as a coalition that all of these inequalities must be addressed together and at the same time to successfully begin to bring redress and move Vermont beyond the failed war on drugs, but also to arrive in a just and equitable cannabis marketplace, one that is innovative, accessible, craft-centric, and uniquely Vermont. For the record, we're sort of the new kids in the block, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Jeffrey Pizzatello. I'm a professional cannabis grower. I'm also the co-founder and the executive director of Vermont Growers Association. We're a C4, a social welfare nonprofit, and we serve as the trade association for the state's cannabis professionals. Basically, think of us as the Vermont Brewers Association back during the 1990s with Greg Noonan, and when him and his cohorts were seeking the craft beer marketplace that we basically enjoy today. So that's us. We study state cannabis law. We network with other state cannabis organizations. We connect with regulators in other states on an ongoing basis. With that said, a large percentage of our membership and our advocates are the state's illicit actors that want to transition into a legal marketplace. Some of them are BIPOC. Many of them are low income, socially disadvantaged, felons with past nonviolent cannabis convictions. Basically poor white people and people of color. And that's why I just want to take a moment and say I'm so proud of our coalition that we have with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, NOFA Vermont, Rural Vermont, and Trace, because we basically represent that fusion politics in the cannabis space in Vermont. We're united by our shared interests in seeking just and equitability, and also more importantly, in recognizing that BIPOC have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. Again, all of these inequalities must be addressed together, we feel, and at the same time, other states have laid this groundwork. It is possible, and now's the time to get it done in Vermont. And so thank you again. I will speak for a moment about social equity before I go into some of the agricultural concerns that Graham had highlighted a moment ago. Just to share some stats with you guys. By the end of 2020, the emerging legal cannabis industry in the United States was estimated to be valued at around $40 billion and responsible for about 320,000 new jobs, according to Leafly. Of those stats, only about 4% of that industry is Black-owned businesses. So a $40 billion industry, just over 4% Black-owned ownership. That is what systemic racism looks like. This is a new industry. This is an opportunity. And that 4% ownership is a tragic number. Vermont's new law does not include a social equity program, as you guys are aware, and that's one reason why we are here today. I will say that is unique for 2020. It is now commonplace for cannabis legislation to include a social equity program. It is uncommon not to include one. With Act 164, Vermont is going down that path, senators, that status quo 4% ownership path, unless we change course now. Now is the time, this year is the time to be implementing this, and not simply including a social equity program, but rather refocusing and recentering social equity and restorative justice as our priorities for the state, for our new adult use marketplace. Other states are doing this, as you guys know. Illinois, Massachusetts is exploring this with some innovative licensing. California has this at various municipality levels, Oakland notably. New Jersey is rolling out they just passed Tax and Regulate. They're rolling out a social equity program at the start of their program. And they're finding success. And we don't want to be left behind. So as a partner in a statewide coalition, our organization, the Vermont Growers Association, supports the language put forth by the Racial Justice Alliance to refocus equity and justice in our emerging marketplace. Moving over to small business and agricultural inequities. Vermont cannot arrive at a just and equitable legal marketplace without also addressing the small business and agricultural inequities that exist in Act 164. As also outlined by the governor's non-signing statement, quote, "Of primary concern is the licensing construct, which will disproportionately benefit Vermont's existing medical dispensaries by giving them sole access to integrated licenses and an unfair head start on market access." He goes on, "This creates an inequitable playing field held both for our smaller minority and women-owned businesses and other small growers and entrepreneurs." So right now, the illicit cannabis businesses in the state of Vermont largely, unfortunately, do not see themselves in this law. So if transitioning illicit businesses into this legal space is a concern, now's the time to address that. Clear and fair land use, as my colleague Graham had mentioned, and farmland regulations that make sense for our farming community. We are, after all, an agrarian state. To allow for reasonable, not, again, wild, wild west tomatoes, but reasonable regulation. And I do point to California, Massachusetts, Maine, and other states that are doing this, which I look forward to exploring with you guys. But also defining cannabis cultivation not as a commercial activity. Specifically, we suggest that should be removed. Moving on, equality and equity in licensing is also central to this perspective that's shared throughout the cannabis community with regards to 164. The marketplace is not accessible to them. And so that's why our coalition proposes language with clear definitions for accessible and fair licenses for everyday Vermonters. Act 164 is filled with a lot of these so-called kind of to be determined clauses. One of them is the craft license. Page 26, I forget the actual number. There is a clause that says, we will look to develop craft delivery license, craft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do is we took feedback from Vermonters over the past year. We researched and consulted with other states and regulators and advocates. And we built out, as Graham had alluded, very thoughtful craft licensing in our language that will reform Act 164 and address directly the small business and agricultural inequities that currently exist. Look at Massachusetts, look at Oklahoma, parts of California, Oregon. They all show us the importance of fair and just licensing and what that has on the viability overall of an adult use marketplace. Also critical to addressing the small business and agricultural inequities is accountability, as we had also mentioned, in the CCB. I won't say what the governor had left in his signing statement. I believe that Senator White had just mentioned that, or maybe that was Baruth, I apologize. But his criticisms of the CCB, we share. And we do think that, and it sounds like there may be agreement today, that that is an area that is worth looking into. And I just bring up one anecdote. We see other states have dealt with this, and that is issues with the regulatory body and its impacts on rollout and formation. Notably in Michigan. Michigan had a similar bill as ours years ago. They developed a state level commission that was appointed by the governor, selected by their legislative body. And after about a year and a half of operations, Michigan ultimately needed to dissolve that commission because it turned out that one of the commissioners on that body was a little too close to the dispensaries. And their rollout, their market rollout was grinding to a halt. And so they dissolved that commission, they corrected that, and they're now moving towards at a more reasonable pace. So just to echo that concern, as my colleague did a moment ago, And that basically concludes my written remarks. But I do want to follow up just briefly and add that a lot of our language is designed to mitigate and eliminate a lot of the concerns that we are now hearing, not just from your body, but from other elected officials throughout the Senate and the House with regards to Act 164's implementation and formation process. I've watched every committee hearing on S25 to date. And in some of your meetings, you guys, senators, have rightly so expressed numerous times concerns about rollout, how well-intended bills in other states flounder at formation. And we see that happening in this state with Act 164. And now is the time to take preventative measures to prevent that. A lot of our language that we hope you guys will adopt will seek to eliminate those issues that we think will only increase unless we take action this year. So we share those concerns in implementation and formation. We share those concerns that you're expressing about what is legislative responsibility, what is rulemaking responsibility. A lot of what we're proposing is what other states are enacting at the legislative level. Licensing is a legislative priority. So thank you for your time, and I'll take your questions if you guys have any.
Senator White.
So thank you. I'm curious about your comments about the control board and how you would structure that. And I found it very interesting that if in, I think you said Michigan, where one person was, instead of just kicking that person off, they just dissolved the whole commission. And so I'm just, because I'm on the nominating committee and we have just sent names to the governor. And I can tell you the people that we interviewed are very serious about this and are looking to do their very best. So I just would wonder how you would restructure the Cannabis Control Board.
Well, thank you for that question. I think it can be as simple as, and we want to stay simple and reasonable and realistic because it's important for us to get these reforms passed this year because we are in implementation and formation. So timeliness is relevant here. So we're not suggesting necessarily a reconfiguration of the board in so much a little more accountability vis-a-vis what Graham had mentioned, which is allowing the state to adjust for these issues if they come up, because we have seen in other states that they do in fact come up. You know, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We should not be surprised with special interests. It's just part of this country. So we need to navigate around that. And we're not implying that the board as of this moment is corrupt. No, we're trying to be preventative because of what we've seen in other states.
I still don't understand how you would reconstruct it so that, because it does, the accountability is to the legislature or the board.
Well, there would be an advisory committee, I think.
Well, there is an advisory committee.
Right. So that's where the changes.
Right, exactly. We would, in our language that we sent, it does rely on the advisory committee to perform more of the accountability that we're seeing.
So it wouldn't come to the legislature, it would go to the advisory committee?
As of this moment, and we can explore that together to find out what's best for us. But I would say that would be a starting point.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah, what is the status of the advisory committee, Michelle, if you're still with us?
So the Act 164 required the advisory committee to be seated by May 1st. That was premised on that the board was going to be seated by January 19th. And so the advisory committee works under the authority of the board. They do not have, so they are making recommendations and working with the board, but they don't have independent authority. I think what the witness is referring to is in his proposal, he asks that the advisory committee have veto power over the board. And and a few other things. So but they don't have anything like that now. Right now, it's comprised of, I think, 12 members with varying expertise, and their job is to be assisting the board in developing the policy that's going to guide the rules and the application process.
And how are they appointed? Remind me. The advisory
It
board?
varies depending. So there's different appointment authorities. So some is by the speaker, some by the committee on committees, the AG's office, et cetera. Yep, and the governor. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Peggy has posted on the website Jeffrey's outline of which could be a legislative proposal, I guess. And it's kind of helpful to have that access to that outline that he provided to the committee. Again, yeah, the Senator Baruth. Yeah.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. So I guess I go back to the witness's statement about timeliness. I agree. I think timeliness is of the essence. I think at this point, if we were to, in essence, I think what you're suggesting is that we reverse the power dynamic between the advisory board and the cannabis control board. So in effect, the advisory board would become the one with the power in the equation. And that might, that's a discussion that could be had. I think it would add quite a lot of time to the calculus, because we're staffing now based on the idea that the people on the advisory board are purely advisory. And so they have expertise or whatever, but they were not selected with an eye toward hiring and firing the control board. So I think at this point, what you're talking about strikes me as kind of a not repairing the car, but putting in a new engine. And I think it can only add time to a process that is woefully behind time now. So I think there are a slate of things that we would look at a couple of years down the road, and it may be that that's one of them. I'm satisfied now that I know that board members can only remove one another for cause, and the governor has the power to appoint, and then they're term limited after that. So, I take your point. I just think it's probably not the moment for addressing it.
Thank you for that. Oh,
Go ahead.
Can I-
Oh, Michelle. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, just to remind everybody that the advisory committee, those folks are per diem and expenses. They're not employees of the state, and so they're not salaried or anything like that. So the only folks who are full-time employees are the 3 board members and the executive director and the administrative assistant. So
Jeffrey, go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, no problem.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Senator and Michelle. Yes, just stepping back for a moment, the intent here is to help accelerate and also meet the deadlines this year, while providing a more thorough build out of the implementation and formation vis-a-vis licensing structure, land use, opening up agriculture for the agrarian state, or at least making it a little bit more accommodating for our farmers, and also bringing accountability. So I take your note, Senator Baruth. If the accountability is there, satisfactory threshold has been met, that's fine. But I will say that what we're proposing is not intended to slow down. And so if it is seen that way, that is not our intent, just to underscore that. So it is, we see, studying other states, it took Maine about 5 years to arrive in adult use market. It took Massachusetts about 3.5. And that's after they open up and start issuing licenses. That's at that point in time, the clock says go. And so we have some of our members, for instance, I won't name any names, but some of the most reputable CBD and hemp storefronts in the state. And when they tell us they will need at least 12 months from the day they get their license to then participate in the marketplace. What does that say for the rest of Vermonters who are in that position? So that speaks to how quickly, that speaks to viability, that speaks to maturity of market, that speaks to success in rollout. We want to have a successful rollout. We want to include as many Vermonters as early as possible without slowing down this process. And so that's overall what we're proposing. And that also gets at a lot of our primary intent of this legislation. And I don't want to speak for you guys, which is to transition Vermonters out of that illicit market into that legal space. So this gets at that.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So many ways here. I feel like this committee is not, so much of this has to do with agriculture, so much of it has to do with the government operations committees and finance. So I'm a little, thankfully we have Michelle here who understands this stuff backwards and forwards. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. Appreciate the testimony and also the written document that you provided.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Okay, Mark Hughes. Morning, Mark.
Mr. Chair, morning, Senator Benning, Senator Nitka, Senator Bayruth, and Senator White. I'm Mark Hughes. I'm Executive Director of the Racial Equity, I think it's the Racial Equity, you know what I am. I'm the Executive Director of the Racial Justice Alliance and Justice for All. And I just want to thank you for taking some time with us today. I'm here to discuss S25 and also the bill that will be emerging from the House that seeks to address the racial equity. So first of all, I just want to give a shout out to definitely NOFA and Growers in Rural and Trace. We've been with them. We've been working with them weekly. We meet on a weekly basis since probably last August, maybe July or something like that. It's a serious relationship, and I just wanted to let you know that the first thing we did is we spent 2 sessions, which were each an hour and a half, covering systemic racism. I presented that. So that's how we got on the same page. That's where we started in our commitment to one another. Because I know you see a lot of coalitions. This is really worth the conversation. I think this is really, really important to this coalition and the work that we're putting forward to you, and in what you saw us doing last session with S54, and you saw fierce opposition to. So what we came up with is we thought it'd be a good idea to learn. I thought it'd be a good idea to learn about ag, and they thought it'd be a good idea to learn about systemic racism. So, and increasingly, we're hoping to be able to further educate our constituents and to be able to bridge those areas as well, because there's a lot in common. We discovered that we were pretty powerful because a lot of times the best barometer is when people come after you when you bring forward an idea, and we were essentially attacked last session from all sides. But we're glad to be here. We're glad the governor chimed in his non-signing statement at the end. We're glad that you, Senator Sears, under your leadership, and also the willingness of some others, did circle around with us off session, even as recent as just a couple days ago, having more conversations about this. We are appreciative. So thank you for that. Regarding systemic racism, I just wanted to say that I think that what I've seen, and I too, God bless you too. I too have been in and out of a lot of committee meetings, to include committee meeting discussions in various committees across Senate and House. in conversations, and I see conversations about systemic racism and around systemic racism, and many people just still trying to, I guess, prove that it exists, almost like a global warming conversation. So yeah, I just want to, as far as what we're doing, the work that the Alliance is doing here, we're here in this area as a result of something we stumbled across last biennium in Act 250. And that is that we came to understand that our land use law had a 50-year review, and there was not one word on racial equity in it. Not one. So as S54 emerged, that seemed to make sense. I drew a connection. We took some of the lead, and then the work became it made a little bit more sense. And now we're in the middle of a triple pandemic, and there's a racial reckoning, and we're still having this conversation. What we wanted to see is more language, equity language in the policy. We put forward some recommendations. It didn't necessarily happen until actually, and I think it actually left your committee, because if I'm not mistaken, the language that we were seeking to emulate came out of Illinois, which was far after crossover, if I'm not mistaken. But we were not able to track it down in house, and then we know the rest of the story. So I just wanted to, just go back to Senator Beirut's comment about putting a new engine in this thing, and also this whole thing about time, because time seems to never be on our side. Because it wasn't on our side last biennium towards the end of the session, because we were asking to slow this thing down so we can make more sense of it, so we can get it out there in a way that made more sense. And now, since we were not successful in doing so, we're here on the other side, and there's still not enough time. So I'm wondering when in the hell there's going to be enough time at some point or another to actually get some of this work done. But yeah, there is a new engine syndrome, and that's kind of what we sidestepped, because the water's already under the bridge, if you know what I mean, as far as the structure of this thing. We've got serious concerns about structure and process with this particular, this endeavor to get regulation underway. But we're down the road. We've got it out of the gate. So now what we're doing is doing in-flight plane construction, and we're hoping to be able to get retrofitted with some additional language. Now, I just want to pause here just for a second and just say briefly that every single aspect of what my colleagues and my good friends have brought forward, they're running in tandem with what I'm bringing to you right now. It's not a separate conversation. We haven't changed pages or anything like that. We're in full support of, and would not like to go forward without these requests that have been put before you with these folks. Unfortunately, there's some other folks who couldn't attend. And I just wanted to just backtrack a little bit, because I know, Senator Sears, you said that some of this stuff doesn't pertain to this committee. And I saw my brother Graham's frustration, and I continue to watch him going from committee to committee, trying to figure out where his grievances should lie, or where his recommendations should be submitted. So I, of all people, can relate to that, because there is no racial justice committee. And we've been doing this for a while, and Senator Sears, with the Joint Justice Committee, you and I had some conversations after that. And we're dealing with a structure of government, that has had a habit of oppressing Black and brown people since its inception, that wasn't designed to accommodate us. And I think what they're doing is they're running up against the same issues. Fortunately, we do have the government operations chair sitting in with us today. So that's a good thing. And if it's more appropriate to have those conversations relating to government operations in that committee, we love that invitation. We'd love to come over to have those conversations. Three things on S25, the ballot question, social equity, and the percent of cannabis flower. I'll start with the percentage of cannabis flower and so forth. Now I'm going to go to just what's going on over here at the Alliance, and I want to say transparently, I haven't had this conversation with my colleagues on our coalition, but I think they would agree, and I think largely they already have agreed that they're not really finding a problem with this. But I think that's largely. I just want to comment just positively and just compliment the innovation. I thought that's a good idea. I thought it was a good idea. I don't know where the numbers came from, but it's awesome. And I think that's over in
Page 6.
Yeah, page 6. It's
Lines 10 through
lines 10 to
12.
12. So that's really good. It's backing up into social equity. I think it's a start. I think it's a start, and what I've sent over to you, you should have in your email right now, is I think is a place to build upon that type of language. It's definitely a start. It's beginning to go in the right direction. It's better than where we started, where we left off at last year. And as far as the ballot question is concerned, I view that as largely reactionary. I don't even think it was an issue last year. I know we've done some local work here in Burlington. I know Chris Pearson was at those meetings. He certainly wasn't happy that what we were doing was urging the city of Burlington to have an option to divide that question for the purposes of delaying market entry for the larger businesses, to give smaller businesses an opportunity to get out in front of it. So I view this as mostly reactionary. I personally, from Mark, I just think it's an example of the legislature coming back to in just response to activism that's happening in the community, and just closing what is largely kind of maybe a loophole or something like that. So it's kind of disappointing that's in there, and it's also, it seems as though it's kind of hard to get after, because there's a lot of communities that have already pulled the trigger on that. So I see a lot of expressions on your faces right now, so I'll just pause right there.
I'm trying to follow where you are. My expression is I'm trying to follow where you are.
I was talking about the Senator White, really, but I wasn't.
Oh, okay. All right. You're talking about the votes in 25 communities.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Is there something is there a question that you had, Senator White? I'm glad to answer any questions that you have.
Well, I was just going to say the reason that's in there is because the compromise had towns doing an opt-in instead of an opt-out. The fear was that some towns would just never hold a vote, and therefore retailers, anybody who wanted to be a retailer, would have no idea whether they could set up in that town or not. So this is a drop dead deadline telling them that they, by a certain date, they need to have a vote, or they will be a town that allows it. That's all
Thank
this
you.
is.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I wanted to spend maybe a couple more minutes here, but I would like to check in with the chair to find out if we had how much more time we had to have this conversation.
About half an hour.
Well, it's not going to take that long. So I get it. I understand. This is, this question again, Mr. Chair. I think that the question is overly prescriptive. I think that the question it does eliminate the ability for a town to put a question on a ballot that would give them the ability to in some way or another divide that question, in the wake of the work that we've done here in Burlington to do exactly that, as well as many other cities and towns across the state. I won't belabor the point. I get what the senator is telling me, but that's not what I came here to talk to you about. I just wanted to give you Mark's opinion on this policy and the response that happened with it. Okay. Yep. As far as this, what I put before you, and I would, Mr. Chair, I would love to entertain an invitation, given the fact that we bifurcated the way in which we're addressing these issues, And I know that this is not the committee to have that particular discussion that I just went over, but I would love to, go into whatever committee of jurisdiction that has, and we can have more conversation about it. But again, it's just overly prescriptive, and I think it's the premise in which it's basically telling the cities and towns what to do in terms of how they want to pose that question. I'm assuming that the committee has received the document that I just sent over.
I don't have it on the committee webpage right now.
I just posted it.
Okay, well then what do I have to do? Refresh it? Peggy?
Yes, that should work.
Are we talking about Representative China's language?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, what about Senator Rahm's language?
I don't have that
That's
language
the
in
same.
front of me, but I can say, just on behalf of the Racial Justice Alliance, not the coalition, I would say we are supportive of Representative Rahm's language. We would like a separate entity, a different entity besides the Department of Public Safety being a granting entity. We think it kind of flies in the face of what it is that we're trying to do here. I know that there are a lot of white people with political and economic power that don't understand folks who have been impacted, systemically impacted, by systems of oppression, to include those that are so-called public safety related. And that question would be, whose safety are you talking about? Because seemingly the more white people feel safe, the less Black people feel safe. That's why I'll be in committee this afternoon over in the government operations, having that conversation with the legion of police that are rotating in that revolving door coming out of there. But yeah, we don't really see a good reason why this should be administered by public safety. Well, the proposal that Senator Rahm put together, Mr. Chairman, it was my understanding that her original amendment had public safety to administer. And I'm fully aware of that because I've been in direct conversation with her.
We're taking testimony on her proposal in our committee because I think that was the agreement with Senator Sears. So we're taking testimony on that. And actually what she did is she asked that it be administered by somebody other than the Justice Council. And the Justice Council is not part of the Department of Public Safety, just for your information.
Not yet. So yeah, but I am fully aware of what the Justice Council is and what they represent. And maybe I may have misspoke in that particular area, but no, we have no desire to have the Justice Council be the grant entity. That was the original language. I am aware that she did walk that back, but that was the original language, and that's what I was opposed.
So here's where I'm getting confused, Senator White. Now, I've got so many proposals here that I just don't have the ability. I'm sorry. I may not be the brightest guy in the world.
Join the club.
I know I'm not, but now I'm confused. I have Mark's proposal, which is Representative China's proposal. We have Senator Rahm's, and you're taking Senator Rahm's proposal up this afternoon.
My understanding was that we would, except for the whatever that section is that deals with the social equity section, that we would deal with the rest of the issues. And since her amendment was proposing to commit funds, we took that up. It wasn't part of that social equity thing. So, but I'm happy to do it in here if you want to.
No, I don't care. As long as it gets done.
We've taken some testimony and we're taking more this week.
Go ahead, Mark.
So imagine the confusion of the activists. There's definitely no committee for, like I said, for racial justice. But I had to jump off earlier because I was on taking a call with Tom Stevens as well. So we're trying to cover all of this. If systemic racism really exists, if it exists anywhere, it exists everywhere. So we're trying to figure this out. Maybe we should restructure the government. I don't know. but I would like to be able to at least do this effectively. So what we'll talk about now is racial equity, and everything that I've heard so far leads me to believe that I've landed in the right committee to have that conversation. So if you humor me for a minute and turn over to page let's see here. I want to go to chapter 39 and just talk a little bit about definitions, which I think is really important.
One second, Mark. Chapter 39 being.
That's page 3 of 20. My
Okay.
apologies.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just wanted to, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but I just wanted to just make it clear. We are defining agency. We're defining center. We are defining, importantly, disproportionately impacted areas. So we can make sure that we're talking about the same thing. Member of an impacted family, program board, the whole idea of where people have resided, where they reside, and so forth. So, and I think the challenge that we're having with this kind of policy is that I would think we have this. I think there is a tendency to want to try to take a look at the regulation of an industry, whatever the industry is, and saying, okay, did this weed hurt somebody, and who is that, and trying to find out who they are, and also, and I think a lot of times that helps. That that does two things. We miss the fact that systemic racism hurt a lot of people, and this played into it. This is a part of it. And we also miss the fact that as a result of the condition of vast categories of people with anomalies, and there are anomalies, you see them frequently, many of them serve with you, is that, these folks are disproportionately disadvantaged to the extent that they don't have necessarily the upper leg to be able to even get into this market or others. So I think those are the conversations I think that we need to frame this stuff in. So definitions are good. I want to keep moving. The development fund is over on page 6 of 20.
Mark, before you move on from definitions.
Yes.
I'm looking at social equity applicant.
Yes.
And am I missing it? It doesn't mention race at all.
Where is it? Tell me where the.
This would be page 5. Social equity applicant.
Social equity applicant means an applicant that meets at least one of the following criteria.
Right, but there's no mention of race, and in disproportionately impacted area, there's also no mention of race.
I don't know that it would necessarily be in disproportionately impacted areas, but I would think that it would be in social equity. I've noted it, and I'll come back to it.
Okay.
I didn't notice that, believe it or not.
Is this a bill that's being proposed by Representative Chena in the House? Is that what, does he have a bill in the House?
Yes, this originated with the Racial Justice Alliance, and it was submitted in the House. Michelle, you're doing like this is making me nervous.
Well, I just wanted to say the version that you provided to the senators is not the version that that members signed out. So.
Well, that's problematic. Can you get that out to us, because the bill originated here.
The sponsor has it. I can look. It's in the queue for introduction. I don't think it's made it out for introduction yet, but I had seen that version, and I had a conversation with the sponsor, and the language some of the language and you had changed the dates in there, and I was instructed to go back and change them back to the date. So
I think I have the, unless the motivation has changed or, structure has changed, I think we can go from
thank you so much for that, Michelle. That's helpful. It's just disappointing, and it's almost tempting to just terminate this testimony right now. But I'm not going to do that, because what I do know is that the difference between the two versions, Michelle, if you can just please help me out here, without divulging too much. but largely, I think that it was largely those dates that we were struggling with. And I will attempt to continue unless Michelle thinks
No,
there's
no,
more
go ahead.
material.
No, go
No,
ahead.
it's fine. I just didn't want anyone thinking that version is the version that's being introduced because
That's
it's a different. Okay.
That's incredibly helpful. But I do think that
Mark, why don't we
Senator-
go, why don't we move forward with this version and we'll see. I'm trying to, I'm following this version.
okay.
And I don't know where this committee will come down. I need to talk to the House members too, if they're taking this bill up. And we meet in the middle or whatever, but let's follow through with the bill. This is the proposal that the Racial Justice Alliance is supportive of. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Can I just ask, is this proposed as an amendment to S25? Or is this language that's being advanced in a different bill on the other side?
Let's consider an amendment to S25. And then we can,
But if they're introducing a bill on the other side,
hey,
Well,
Senator, first of all, Mr. Chair, if I may, the answer to Senator Benning's question is yes. This has been introduced on the other side, and yes, we would like to consider it as amendment. If you will recall, in 2017 with H4 92, the bill that would later cross back over in a vehicle called 308 that became Act 54, we started work on S116, which was on the wall here before H492 crossed over. So this is not unusual work that we're doing here. Well, maybe it is unusual, but it's not unprecedented. So I mean, I understand your frustrations, Senator White, not to be too direct, but this is not unprecedented. We did this,
Mark,
we did it in this committee.
Mark, can I just pause you for a second?
Yes, sir.
About a year ago, we were working on a bill that eventually came out, and you were trying to get language introduced, and I distinctly recall you and I having a conversation about whether there was time to get language in, given the time frame that we had to operate in. You were frustrated that we couldn't get it in. I think we were all frustrated that we didn't have time to get it in. So a promise was made to have us all take another look, trying to figure out a way to plug this conversation back into the mix at some point in time. So when I signed on to S25 originally, I knew that there were provisions that we had to deal with. This morning, I've been wrestling with trying to figure out where you were going. And unfortunately, we didn't have it posted on our website until just a few minutes ago. So I'm hearing that this language is introduced in a bill in the House. I'm also hearing that a portion of this conversation is being dealt with in GovOps. And I'm thinking to myself, we are a week and a half away from crossover if you discount the discussion that we've got, not the discussion, but the break we're taking next week. And I'm trying to wrestle with how we're going to do this, and we're all looking at the same time frame we had the last time around, which is very frustrating for all of us, you included. So I just want to make clear, this language you're introducing now is something you are requesting as an amendment to S25 in its draft form.
Yep.
Well, Senator,
That is, if that's the case, Mark, there's no reason to.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's all I needed to know.
If I could add one.
It was in the email that the document was attached to when I sent it to you. It stated very clearly that I was requesting it as an amendment.
Right.
And if I could add just one thing, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. Mark is saying he wants us to consider it as an amendment. He's also working on it in the House. And as he points out, that's very common to have a vehicle in both bodies, because one can die or one can not make crossover. So Senator Sears has already said, let's move forward with consideration of this as an amendment.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I just don't want to get stuck on process because that's like the last move before God, you know?
I'm suggesting we just get going.
So what I'd like to do is get going as well, but I just wanted to state, Senator Benning, that your concerns and your observations are precisely the reason why we are approaching it in this manner, because of the false deadlines that have been established by this body that we call crossover, that you have rules you can suspend if necessary, but let's play within them, and because we're playing within them, what we can do here is we can just introduce a bill in the House while at the same time consider it as an amendment in the Senate. And the chair seems to be okay with that. So moving on. The area.
I think we're at the social. I'm at social equity loans and grants. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to stop, Mr. Chairman, over at the Cannabis Business Development Fund. This is language that should not be unfamiliar on page 6 of 20. And the language is as follows: is the fund, and just to be clear, the fund is it's comprised of fees collected from integrated licenses. This is pursuant to the last chapter that we're going to cover. We have a whole chapter that it basically mirrors your integrated chapter as well. We'll get to that. It talks about some $200,000 being transferred from the Cannabis Registration Fee Fund. It also talks about that 10% of revenues raised of the cannabis excise tax, that's not to exceed $2 million. There's a fund that exclusively used for the following purposes, and you can just read that: the low interest grants and loans.
Mark, can I just ask you a question about that? Would it not make more sense to have to actually have an appropriation ahead of time if we want to give loans and grants to people to get them on an equal footing? If we wait until there's funds generated from the revenue, that's after the fact. So wouldn't it make more sense to have to ask for an actual appropriation to begin that fund beforehand, so that people can have a leg up before things get going?
Just to be clear, you're talking about general fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would leave that to the committee, and as well as, I think that this is where our thought process started. We do rely on you for some things. So yeah, I mean, I would defer to the committee, and if that seems like a better approach, we would be amenable to that.
Because we have already discussed both here and in appropriations, pre-funding certain parts of this operation to get things going. So what Senator White is talking about would become part of that pre-funding.
Correct.
And I think she makes a good point.
I think so too. And the other piece of that is and I'll keep it moving, is that we've also, and you probably saw a letter that came out from us last week, asking for a holding spot in appropriations for cannabis. I think it may have been a part of that. I might be mistaken. Don't hold me to that. We keep moving
along.
Social equity loans and grants. I think this part is pretty straightforward. We're talking ACCD. These are loans and grants to equity applicants, which are defined in the front here. This is large. Most of this language is largely just emulating, as Senator Benning, you had said before, that you've seen the Illinois language. This is it's not cut and paste, but it's pretty close to the stuff that they're talking about. There's collecting any premiums, fees, charges, costs coordinating assistance under the program with activities of the Vermont Department of Financial Regulation, Agency of Agriculture. This is all stuff that the agency is going to do. I won't go down that list too much. I am certain that all of the language that I'm covering is in the final, is in the actual, the one that was actually placed in. If it was not, Michelle would interrupt me. We'll get down to grants made pursuant to this section in section DE beginning. So now I'm not going to touch anything on dates, because I think what happened is there was some confusion on folks were throwing dates out there that were you know, pre-Act 164. They were actually looking at the existing policy when they were trying to line dates up. I think most of these dates should be, you know, May of 2022 or something like that at a minimum. That might be right. I'm going to keep it moving. I think most of this language here is pretty straightforward. Community social equity program is 10 of 20. And I'm just going to breeze through that, you know, that it's established. There are, you will see what we played around with is how do we reduce the number of folks that are actually on this. So this is that was our final cut, which you saw moving to 12 of 20, following through with
Mark,
yes.
if I could just echo something I said earlier, even on the social equity program piece, there's no mention of race all the way through this bill.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, that just strikes me as bizarre, because I had.
It's not completely bizarre.
Well,
I think that there may be some areas where we can. It's interesting because when you just come out and you say, look, you need to give Black people stuff, and then our senator, who's a lawyer, knows that you can't do that because the Civil Rights Act of 1964, you know, you fly in the face of something and then you get reverse discrimination and everybody's hollering. So now we figured out how to create language to do so, and I'm being asked why.
No, I think you're misreading what I'm saying. I'm saying that you defined, social equity in the bill without reference to race. It's just reference to poverty and to policing. And so I understand that could include the BIPOC community, but there's no legal reason why you can't mention race, or, you know, in the same way that we have all kinds of programs that are that have a component of that. So the reason I say it seems a little bizarre is because this is coming from the most racially sensitive people that I know in Burlington, people that I look to for guidance on that area. I feel as though if I had produced this bill without reference to race, people would say, "What are you thinking?" So I'm reading through it, and every mention of social equity or disproportionately impacted community is completely free of the discussion of systemic racism, et cetera.
I get you. You got a fair point there, and I think we struggled really hard with this, and I think we're not done with it. It is introduced as an amendment, and there could be nothing more gratifying than a member of Senate Judiciary telling me that we need to talk more about race. Trust me. So yeah, we'll definitely get, and maybe we've accomplished what we sought out to accomplish in some ways, is to make them say it. So you said it. So now it's time for us to get to that. You know, we're running out of time, but Senator Bayruth, that is really well taken, and I appreciate that. That I really appreciate that, and we got some work to do here. And you got to understand, even the Racial Justice Alliance, we're trying to figure out, how do we position this policy in a way where it's going to be most effective. And just like everybody else, we don't always get it right. So our hope is to be able to continue to work with the committee to get this language right. And we're expecting tons of testimony on this as well. Okay.
Could I ask a question, Mark?
Sure.
Given these concerns and needing to do it right and to get to continue working on it and getting more testimony. Does it make sense for us to try to push these huge issues and amendments through before crossover? Is there a real reason why this needs to actually be passed this session, or would it make sense for us to continue these conversations in really meaningful ways and work on it and have it ready to be acted on next January by both bodies? Because we're talking about some time out anyway before things get implemented. So I just wondered.
So frankly, I'm going to say it, as I always say it, just say it, is that, really what we're talking about is some language that should have been in last biennium. And what we're talking about is the fact that, it seems like we always find a reason to wait. And also understanding that the truth is that whether this moves forward or not, whether we get the testimony and whether this is integrated as a part of the bill, is really in the hands of white political and economic power, and you're going to make that decision at the end of the day. I can tell you whatever I want to tell you, but you're going to do what you want to do. But what I will tell you is that enough is enough. We should move this forward, and we should stop making up reasons not to do it. I think if we would have did it last biennium, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, Senator White, because of course you want to get it right, but then let's not let perfect be the enemy of done. It didn't hinder you last session.
I was just thinking that some of the ag issues were very complicated also.
There are certain parts of this bill that Mark has proposed that are absolutely should be part of this bill. I'm looking at section 3 of the bill, page 5, as introduced of S25, talks about social equity. So everything here that talks about social equity, I don't see it as being, maybe we can argue about the fees, we can argue about other stuff. I don't see a reason not to have some more expansive language in here, whether it's the whole bill or a portion of the bill. I think we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, this being the committee, if you established that this was the committee of jurisdiction for racial equity issues, then I'm gratified that the chair has chimed in on it. And I would just say, I'll just take you to section 2 to enclose on the integrated license piece. Is really the big deal here is notwithstanding provision. This is page 17 of 18. Really, this is just about how do we deal with integrated license. There's a program that you already read about on the previous pages that I told you I was going to get to this. So there's some fees. There's a $30,000 non-refundable fee for cannabis the cannabis board. I don't know. That might be a good swag. But there's also a non-refundable payment of 3% of the dispensary's total sales between a certain period of time, or $100,000, whichever is less, being paid into the Cannabis Control Board and deposited into that business fund, that business development fund that we talked about earlier in this policy. Okay, and it goes on. It talks about conditions for licensing, conditions at the time of receipt of a conditional license. The dispensary is going to commit to one of the following: either make a contribution of 3% of your total dispensary sales from a certain period, or $100,000 or less. Make a contribution of 3% of your total sales for another period, or $100 or less, whichever is less, for training or education programs at a Vermont community college, or make a donation of $100,000 or more to a program that provides job training to persons recently incarcerated, or that provides services in disproportionately impacted areas. Okay, and then again, you can also participate as or host a cannabis business establishment incubator program approved by ACCD. And this is that is in which a dispensary agrees to provide a loan of at least $100,000 and a minimum 1-year mentorship to a cannabis establishment licensee that qualifies as a social equity applicant. Okay. Once we add BIPOC in there, then that'll make it a little sweeter, right, Senator Beirut? So the I'm going to conclude there. This is, again, what was floated in the legislature last year. The House appropriations, Kitty Toll, God bless her, wish she was still here. And they also had they were provided the 15-page document, which was the precursor to this. The House Government Operations Group was offered the 15-page document, which was a precursor to this. You have seen the 15-page document, which was a precursor to this. This is slightly modified in that. So we do have a head start. We're not starting at the beginning. The governor's already, give us a little shove on his non-signing agreement that he would be in supportive of stuff like this. I believe that if we take this thing forward, if we can corral on the other side folks on this ag piece at the same time, pull my colleagues in, and Senator White, I do agree with one thing that you've many things that you've said, but one in particular is that regarding the ag piece, we're ride or die. So if they're not going with us, we don't want to go. Okay. So as far as how we want to put this whole thing together, I'm pretty sure that if the will is in this committee, because this is room 1 in the big house, if the will is in this committee, if the political will is in this committee, then I think we can make it happen. But I am urging you, I'm imploring you, and I am kindly requesting your support on this particular amendment to S25, and also your political capital across the State House to bring your colleagues into line with the work that we're trying to do. I appreciate your time. I'm glad to take any other questions.
Any questions for Mark?
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
I appreciate your time. It's always good to be here.
Yeah, nice to talk with you. And I think, again, if you look at Section 3 of the bill as introduced, obviously April 1st, 2021 doesn't work either.
Right. Michelle will tell you that the dates are are generally jacked on this bad copy of the bill.
Well, we can certainly. I understand the thrust of the bill. The wording may not be perfect. The House bill I'm talking about now. So appreciate the testimony. We're going to take a short break and then come back to hear from some other witnesses, and I've lost my agenda.